How's it going, everyone? Yosef back here with another video, and I hope you're having an amazing week so far. Today, we are going to do a bit of a different type of video. Instead of a car review, I wanted to talk about something that I think is really important. But before I get into that, if you're new to the channel, thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Yosef. I happen to be a car enthusiast who has 3 kids, and I used to sell cars before. So if you're interested in my perspective, please consider subscribing. All right, now on with the video. So today's video is to really talk about, should you buy a new or used car in 2025? Now, I'm sure this is something that you've thought about a lot, because I have as well. Every time I'm in the market for a car, I always have to consider, should I get used or should I get new? And there are so many things that always go into my mind that help me sort of figure out which is the right way to go. And so today, I wanted to unpack that for you and just give you my thoughts around what are all the things that go into deciding whether you get a new or used car. And to be honest with you, this has come up several times in the last week from friends of mine that are in the market for a car. So I thought, you know what better way to share that information than to make a video about it and share it with all of you. So today we are going to talk about that. And for those of you who are very impatient and just want to get an answer to this, well, I'm sorry to say there is no short answer. I wish I could tell you that there's a blanket statement. Anytime you're looking to buy a car, it should always be a new car or a used car, but that simply is not the case. There are so many things that go into the decision about whether you should buy new or used that I have categorized them into a few specific buckets. And I've got my laptop over here so I can refer back to it because I really want to make sure that I get every point and I don't miss out on anything. And so the buckets are emotion, purpose, finances, and types of vehicles. Now, I will explain each and every one of those with a lot of examples as we have our conversation today. But before I get into too much detail, I wanted to say that Doug Demuro has posted a video not too long ago that he sort of covers this topic in a bit of detail. And he covers it from the perspective of, you're buying your child their first car. And what should you do? How do you make that decision? And I think he covers a lot of really great points in that video. So I'm going to put a link to that in the video description down below. But I'm going to elaborate on a lot more than what he covered. And I think I'm going to put a different perspective, or a slightly different perspective, onto it. So get ready. I hope you have a cup of coffee with you. This is going to be a bit of a lengthy video, but hopefully it'll be interesting and insightful, and it will help you with your next car purchase. It is really important to understand this concept, not just for cars, but for so many other things in life. You may be someone who collects watches. Should you buy a new watch or a used watch? Maybe you're somebody that enjoys technology. Do you buy a new TV, or do you buy a used TV or a phone or some other piece of technology? People do this also with clothing. Do you buy new clothes or used clothes? There are so many different areas of life where these concepts will be applicable. And so hopefully this will shed some light on not only just the car market, but also the opportunity to make decisions about buying new or used for other things in life. So let's start talking about the first bucket, which is emotion. Now, there are a lot of people out there that have no emotion whatsoever when they go out and buy a car. And so this category, this bucket, doesn't really apply to them. But for anybody else who sort of thinks about, oh man, I really want to buy this car. It's something that I've always thought about or dreamt of, or maybe it's something that is going to add a lot of value to my life because now it's giving me the flexibility to move around and do what I want to do. Or maybe it's something that I just really enjoy having. I like getting new things. And so there's a lot of emotion involved in that. And sometimes people just want to get a vehicle that allows them to get from point A to point B in a very reliable sort of way. And so you get that emotion factor that goes into it. I want to make sure that I'm not going to be bothered by constant breakdowns, going to the dealership to fix this or that, or having to worry about things, about the vehicle. I want something that's just going to work to get me from where I am now to where I want to be going, really worry-free. And that's also an emotional sort of consideration that goes along with it. So one example that I wanted to cover is, maybe you're the type of person that just loves new things. It's exciting to go to the mall and buy something new or get a gift from somebody, but it's also really exciting to get a new car. There are some people that doesn't matter how expensive it is, they will always go to the dealership and always come out with a new car because they love that new car smell. They love the whole process of getting a new car and having it presented to you and driving away with it, everything brand new and shiny and nobody's touched it before. That is a very exciting feeling, and some people will never change that. That is something that's so important to them, and it doesn't matter how good the price is or how good the warranty is on the used car or any other factor really. They just care about that experience. And so those people will never buy a used car. And it doesn't matter what you sort of throw at them. That is something that is kind of a no-go for them. They will always want to get a new car. And that's totally fine, but that is an important consideration. If you use that emotion to drive your decision, then it's easy for you to decide, yes, I'm going to buy a new car. I will never buy a used car, so I don't really have to worry about that. Simple decision. There are other people who just think, well, if I buy a used car, I'm just buying another person's problems. And that's a valid point. Some people just have so much anxiety about worrying about all the unknowns. What's going to happen when I drive it off the lot? Is something going to break? Is there something that I didn't know about or consider? Maybe there's going to be an issue, a year from now where I really wish I would have had the newer car and not have had to worry about that. And so some people like that, it's just better for them to say, you know what? Doesn't matter how much it costs me. I'm going to go for the new car because I'm just concerned about all these things. And that brings anxiety to your life. And those people will never buy a used car. They will just always go for something new and never have to worry about it. They probably won't keep it for a very long time. Typically, they'll probably lease the car and give it back after 2 or 3 years and just get a new one. And for those people, it makes sense. That is their lifestyle. That is sort of the emotion that goes along with buying a car. They have their mind set around what's important to them, and that's totally fine. And they will never buy a used car. So for them, it'll be very simple and straightforward. But not a lot of people fall into that category. So we have to talk about the next one. So on the flip side, you've got a lot of people out there that will probably say, you know what, I don't really care about the exact spec of the car. I don't really care about that new car smell or the experience of going to the dealership. And those are the types of people that really care about depreciation. And they care about how much the car is going to cost them overall. And those types of people will probably never, or most likely not, buy a new car. They're always going to think about the dollars and cents and how can they maximize the benefit. And that sort of brings us on to the next category, which is the financial side of it. There are some people that are die hard, every dollar counts, and I want to make every dollar that I have go the furthest. And so those people probably are the most complicated to decide if they should buy a new car or used car, because there are so many factors that are in that sort of financial grouping of criteria. And so we're going to unpack this one a little bit, and it's going to take a little bit of time. So if you're not interested in this one, you can skip over. I take no offense to it whatsoever. All right, so the financial side. What are some of the key components of this? Well, you have to think about all the costs that are involved in buying a car. There's the outright purchase cost, there's insurance, there's maintenance, there's gas, the fuel economy, there's interest rates if you're going to be buying the car with a finance or if you're going to be leasing it. You also have to think about the residual value. How much is the vehicle going to depreciate over the course of the time that I'm going to own it? There are so many different costs that are involved in that decision. And so finding that sort of lowest common denominator, which is going to be the cheapest, most cost-effective option for me to go, happens to be very complex because some of those things, they tend to change. It's not a fixed cost. Interest rate, for example, that can go up and down from month to month. The residual values, those can go down and up every year as well. Things like the insurance costs could also change quite a bit. So there's a lot of variability, or variability, I should say, in those costs. So it's not actually a very simple calculation. The other thing I'm going to throw out there is a lot of times things change based on the economy. If you take a look at what happened over the last few years with COVID, that totally decimated the market. Everything just flipped totally upside down. Used cars ended up getting so expensive relative to new cars because nobody could get a new car. They were just not in production. It was hard to get the stock, the inventory at the dealerships. And so used cars became very valuable. And in a lot of cases, the used cars ended up costing more than the new cars. So a lot of people who were thinking about traditionally, I'm just going to buy a used car and not worry about it because it's the cheapest option, that didn't exist for a period of time. And the market is still recovering from that, which is crazy. If you take a look at used car prices, they've gone down considerably, but they're still not to where they were many years ago. Back when I was shopping for my first car, it was a no-brainer. Every car depreciated 20, 30, 40% in the first 2 to 3 years. That was normal for every car. And so it was obvious if you wanted to buy a car and save some money, you just go ahead and buy the used one. It didn't matter how much the maintenance costs were. It didn't matter how much the insurance cost you. It didn't matter what the interest rate was. It always worked out to be cheaper to buy a used car. But is that the case today? So there's a few things that I want to cover with that. And I think based on that conversation, you might have to make your decision to whether that is still a true factor or not. And I wanted to bring up a few examples. So bear with me because I've got them up on the screen. So the first example that I've got for you is a 2025 Mazda CX-5. I took the GT trim. That's a very popular one. It's in a color that costs money. And what I've done is I've taken a look at the price of it if you were to order it new. This includes all the taxes. It includes the freight and PDI and all that stuff. It's already baked in. So let's take a look at the cost. I'm going to turn around so you can see this. The cash purchase price on this CX-5 is basically $51,000 Canadian. And that again includes everything that's part of the purchasing process. And if we take a look at this next tab, I've highlighted for us a similar build for a 2021, just 4 years old CX-5 in white, the same color, same trim level, the GT, and it's going for basically $30,000. So between the $51,000 and $30,000, that's a big price spread. So in this case, assuming that all the other things are relatively similar, meaning that the interest rates are going to be relatively similar and not a crazy difference. The insurance rate is going to be relatively similar. This is a really good deal. If you didn't care about getting a brand new car, it's almost a no-brainer to look at this and say, you know what? I will save the almost $20,000 in 4 years and enjoy myself basically the same car, just a little bit older. Now, in this case, there haven't been too many changes for the CX-5. I'm quite familiar with them, and so there aren't that many new options or features in the 2025s that you wouldn't have had in the 2021s. And so this one seems like a relatively simple decision. But what about a Honda or Toyota? A lot of people say those cars hold their value so well. It's almost obvious that you would want to get the new one because they're almost the same price as the used one. Well, let's find out. Over here, I've built myself a 2025 Honda CR-V Sport. And I put it in white, so it's very similar to the CX-5 that we took a look at before. And again, I've included all of the costs that are involved in this. And if we take a look at the cash purchase price, maybe I'll shift over this way so you can see it better, you'll notice it is $52,000 and change. That's a lot. Very similarly priced though to the CX-5 that we took a look at. But how much is it used? I used the same criteria that we had for the Mazda CX-5 that we took a look at, the same relative kilometers, around 50,000 kilometers. Again, a 4-year-old vehicle, same sort of trim level and features and all that kind of stuff. It's going for $30,000 Canadian, $30,500 Canadian. Again, almost a $20,000, in this case, a little bit more than a $20,000 difference in price just for getting a 4-year-old vehicle. So if you are somebody who didn't care about, again, all the latest and greatest technology and features and stuff like that, and assuming that the insurance would be about the same or relatively similar, the interest rate would be reasonable, to save $20,000 on a 4-year-old car, it starts to make sense. Somebody who bought the brand new car 4 years later has just lost $20,000 on the resale. And that's a big chunk of money. So if you're somebody who cares about the resale value and overall total cost of ownership, you know, maybe thinking about going used is still the best situation for you. So those are just two examples. We could go on and on and on, but I don't want to drive this point home too much with a lot of examples because the video is going to be 10 hours long. But Mazda is generally a brand that typically loses a lot more value than Honda and Toyota. But in this case, if we take a look at the numbers, they are almost identical when it comes to the depreciation for a very commonly bought vehicle. And in 4 years, you're going to be out of pocket almost $20,000. And that sucks. It's a big hit. All right, enough of that. Let's move on to the next point. Now, the amount of depreciation is going to change, obviously, depending on the car that you have. And if you get a base model Corolla or Civic, the depreciation will not be as big as, you know, these SUVs, these compact SUVs. But it really is dependent on the type of car you buy. For example, if you buy a luxury car, you buy a Mercedes, Audi, BMW, Alfa Romeo, insert your favorite luxury brand here, Jaguar, all those cars are going to have different depreciation curves. Some are going to depreciate more, some less. But for the most part, any luxury car or high performance car generally depreciate a lot more than the mainstream stuff that everybody wants to buy, because those are cars people are generally afraid of buying and owning outside of warranty. And so that's something that really affects the cost of the car 2, 3, 4 years down the road. So if you wanted to buy a luxury car, for example, or a high-end sports car, chances are if you give it a couple of years, you'll get it to the point where it'll be a lot more attainable to buy. Now, whether you should buy it or not is a whole different story. I'm not going to get into that. But again, we're talking right now about the financial aspect of buying a used versus new car. And still, in a lot of cases, even though we're in a post-COVID world where the prices aren't exactly where they used to be, 5 years ago, there still is an opportunity to get in and enjoy some depreciated cars on the used market instead of going out and buying the brand new one. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about when it comes to the finances is the interest rates. Now, if you're somebody that buys your cars in cash, all the power to you. That's amazing. It's the best way to avoid an additional cost in terms of cost of ownership. But if you're not somebody who pays cash for your car, which is, I would say, probably 90%, if not more, of the population, you have to think about interest rates. Now, this is a really important factor because new cars tend to have interest rates that are a lot lower than used cars. And the reason for that is the manufacturers are trying to incentivize you to get into that new car. So they actually subsidize the interest rates, whether it's a lease or a finance. Those interest rates tend to be a lot lower than used cars. When you go to buy a new car, you can very easily find interest rates around 2 to 3%. Back in the day, I remember my first car, you could have bought a car for 0% financing, which is crazy. They don't cost any money to finance the car, which is crazy, and that's the best deal in the world, but they don't do that really anymore. So you have to consider the cost of the financing. If you get a used car, typically used car interest rates start at around 5%. And 5% is a big difference from the 2% or 3% that you would have paid before. And if you don't have great credit or you want to finance the car over 6 or 7 years, you may not even have that option to buy it as a used car because they may not finance you. The banks may not be willing to lend you the money over 5 or 6 years. And the interest rate may be 8 or 9 or 10%. And that is a huge difference. That 8 or 9, 10% could add a tremendous cost to the overall purchasing price of your car and total cost of ownership. So if you think about that, maybe you save the $20,000 getting a 4-year-old car, but if you're paying 8 or 10% interest on that, that can add up very, very quickly and sort of take away all of the benefit of the cost that you've saved going used. And that's a really important consideration. Again, that's not something that I can comment on as a general rule of thumb because those interest rates are going to change all the time. So it's really hard to say whether today you should buy one based on the used car market and the interest rates that are available versus next year because it's very hard to predict. Those things are always fluctuating, but it's an important consideration when you're buying a vehicle. So when it comes to the financial aspect of should you buy a new or used car, this is again going to be one of those things that really depends on the situation, the circumstance, the time that you're buying the vehicle. A lot can change between when I made this video and when you go out and actually buy your car, and that could sway you either way. And so it's very important, if you take home one thing about this video in terms of the finances, is you've got to know your numbers. You've got to understand what's going on and all the numbers that are associated with it. The cash purchase price, the finance purchase price, the lease rates, the residual values, your insurance costs, potential maintenance costs, fuel costs, all that stuff are really, really important when you're considering, again, whether you should buy new or used. And those numbers you have to have sort of written down and understood at the time of when you're about ready to buy the car. Because if you do it 6 months earlier, those numbers will change. If you do it 6 months after, those numbers are going to be different. So it's really important to really think about all that stuff, all those considerations financially before you go out and make your decision of whether you buy new or used. Okay, so let's talk about the next category, which is purpose. Now, purpose came to me. I was talking to one of my good friends who happens to support a lot of the YouTube videos that I have, and he was telling me, purpose is something that you have to consider. And I was like, you know what? That is a great category for thinking about, again, how to make a decision about whether you buy new or used. Now, here's something that I'm going to throw at you. The video that Doug Demuro made about buying a car for your child, I think really speaks so much to this concept of purpose, because you have to think about why you're buying the vehicle. That can really help lean you one way or another. If you're buying a vehicle for your kid, it's their first car, you're excited about getting a car for them. There are a lot of people, old school, that would think about you're buying that first car for your kid. It's got to be a cheap, sort of rundown, basic car just to get them through, so they understand the value of getting a car and appreciating what goes into it and paying for all that stuff and responsibility, and power to them. But do you really want your kid to be driving around in a car that may not have all the airbags or anti-lock brakes, or a vehicle that has all the safety features that we have now, the camera systems, the collision mitigation, adaptive cruise control, all these important features that help keep people safe nowadays? You really want your kid to be driving around in an old busted car that, if it gets into an accident, will probably crumble? And if you want a little more insight into that, go watch Doug Demuro's video about it. I think he did a fantastic job covering a lot of those things. But I'll give you another couple examples. Is this your first car? You know, maybe you're an adult. It's the first time that you've bought a car. Maybe it's your second car that you're buying. You have a family and you already own a car and you want to buy a second car to help alleviate the stress. Maybe it's a car that you're buying for business or for business purposes. I do photography, you know, on top of the things that I normally do. And so I needed a car that can help fit all of my photography equipment in it. That's an important consideration. Are you going to be driving a lot? Are you not driving that much? Maybe it's something that you're going to be taking just on road trips. And so you need something that, you know, will be able to take on all those miles reliably. Maybe you want to buy a car and not have to worry about it for the next 10 years. Maybe you're somebody that just wants to buy a car for the short term. You know, you've moved to a new place and you just want a quick, easy car to get you from where you need to be to where you want to be going for a couple of years before you invest in something a little bit different or better. Maybe it's just something that you want to buy because, you know, you've made a lot of money and you want to have a status car, something that shows that you've done well for yourself. Maybe you're somebody who likes to just change up cars all the time. And for you, that's really important to show that you're kind of keeping up with the latest and greatest. There's so many different use cases for the purpose of the vehicle. And I think it's really important to consider those, because some of those may be really easy for you to decide, you know what, I'm just going to go for the new car because that suits the purpose of what I need the car for. Some people may say, well, you know, I need a used car because I just want something to get by for the next couple of years until I get on my feet. Or maybe it's a second car for the family and I just want something that doesn't cost me too much to maintain. And you know, that may drive you to a gently used car, something that's only a couple of years old. Maybe you want to keep a car for 10 years and you don't care about depreciation, and having a long-term vehicle for you is really important. And that serves the purpose of not having to go through negotiation processes again and, you know, loaning money or getting lent money to buy the car. Or maybe you've invested a lot of your hard-earned savings into buying the car and you don't want to have to think about it again for another 10 years. There's so many different things that factor into it. So again, depending on the purpose of the vehicle, you may be swayed one way versus the other. There may be some benefits to buying new versus used. And at the end of the day, you have to understand what the purpose of the vehicle is. And that's something only you can decide. Don't do it because somebody else tells you to do it. Don't do it because you think a lifestyle or something that, you know, sort of shows off something is important to you. Do it because that's important to you. One other consideration when it comes to purposes, there are some people that just want the safest car, you know, and that's really important too. Maybe you're getting a little bit older and, you know, your reaction rates aren't as good as they used to be, or you just want something that's going to make driving those long distances super easy and have the best cruise control available or some self-driving features. You know, there are a lot of good reasons for buying newer cars or brand new cars that offer a lot of this great technology that you wouldn't have had before. So again, the purpose of the vehicle is really, really important. The last category that I'm going to talk about today is the type of car. Now, what I mean by the type of car is there are people out there that want luxury cars. There are people who want family cars. There are people who want sports cars. And this kind of ties into the purpose a little bit. And it also sort of ties into the first category that we talked about, which is emotion. So this is debatable in terms of whether it's a separate category or not, but I thought it might be worth mentioning. Now, type of car is really important because, again, if you're looking for a luxury car, you may be interested in getting something that is really exciting, really cool to look at, has all these amazing luxury features. Maybe you're looking at a Bentley or Rolls Royce, but you're like, man, I don't have $400,000 or $500,000 to drop on a Rolls Royce. But what if I got one that was 4 or 5 years old? All of a sudden now that's an $80,000 vehicle or $100,000 vehicle. Maybe I can afford that. Now it's more attainable. So buying used for a luxury car could be a good way to go. Maybe you have that money and you're willing to go and spend it on the latest and greatest. And so you're willing to spend the $400,000 or $500,000 on the new Rolls Royce Ghost or something like that. You know, and that's perfectly okay too. But knowing what type of car you want to buy can help you steer into making the right decision. I'll give you another example. If you're looking for a sports car, and this is something that sort of touched on me, and I'll tell you a bit more about my example in a moment, but maybe you want a sports car, a performance-oriented car. Sometimes when you go out and you buy the new version of it, they're really expensive. And so you might think, well, if I get one a little bit older, that can help me get into the performance car that I want and allow me to get the car that's really interesting and exciting for me. Maybe you want that car that they don't make anymore that is really exciting from your childhood, and you want to get that vintage car that's really important to you. And so it's a no-brainer. You can't get a new one because it doesn't exist. You have to buy the used one. Or maybe there's a new version of it that you feel is so cool and exciting, and you want to get that one and not the older one because it's got so much technology. And a good example of that is the new Corvettes. A lot of people love the old, 60s, 70s Corvettes. There are a lot of people that love the early 80s Corvettes and, different generations of them. But there are a lot of people that say, I don't want to put up with all the challenges that you had with the older Corvettes and have to deal with sort of the running challenges of them. I want to buy a new modern Corvette that gives me the thrill and excitement, that has a brand name and is still a Corvette, but is mid-engined and has crazy performance numbers and also has great luxurious features and a nice interior. Those are things that can help you decide which way you want to be going. Another good example is getting a manual transmission car. There are a lot of people out there that want to get a manual transmission car, and there just aren't a whole lot of manuals out there anymore, which is crazy to think. Back in the day when I was growing up, there were a lot of manual options. A base Honda Civic or a base Toyota Corolla or Mazda 3, they all came standard with a manual transmission and no air conditioning and wind-up windows. But nowadays, there's probably only 4 or 5 new cars that you can buy with a manual transmission, which is crazy. And so if you want to buy a manual, maybe you have to buy a used car. Or maybe you think, well, I'm going to buy one of the 2 options that we have available now as new cars. And that's really important to me, to buy a new car and keep that manual transmission for the next 20 years. So I'm going to give you an example for myself personally, and I'll sort of tie in how all of these different thought models kind of came into my decision about buying a car. So I was in the market for a vehicle for myself. This was going to be a fun car, a second vehicle. We needed a second vehicle in our family. We have the sort of Mazda CX-9 family hauler, and that was great. But we got to a point where both my wife and I sometimes commute to work, or I have different things that I've got going on, making YouTube videos, my photography gigs, things like that. And my wife wants to take the kids out or do something else or get groceries. And we needed 2 cars to be able to live the lifestyle that we have. And so I wanted something that would be functional, but I also wanted something that would be fun. Part of that criteria was I needed a manual transmission, and I wanted a car that wouldn't depreciate too much because I'm not in a position to lose $20,000, $30,000 in my first couple of years of ownership. It's just not in the cards for me. So for me, there were a few things that came up. Number one, I really needed a manual transmission car. That to me was part of the purpose of buying the car. That was important to me. I really cared about something that allowed me to have fun, give me the driver's engagement, and I wanted a car that was still practical. It had to have 5 seats. So I couldn't get a Toyota Supra. I couldn't get a Subaru BRZ or a Toyota GR86 or something else like that would be fun, would be great, but wouldn't have the capabilities of taking my kids in the car for pickup or drop off or going places where I need to be if the other car is in service, for example. So I needed to find something that was practical and could also take all my photography gear or, do a grocery run or allow me to do the things that I need to do while also having fun. So it needed to have a good trunk space, and I needed also 300 horsepower or more. That was really important to me. I wanted something that was quick, that was fun and exciting to drive. But again, I wanted something that wouldn't break the bank. And I took a look at used cars. Back in the day when I was looking at one, again, I waited 2 years to get my Golf R, and I've had it now for about 1.5 years. So if you think about it, almost 4 years ago, this was still around the time of all the COVID craziness, and to get a used Golf R was almost the same price as getting the new one. And I thought to myself, well, it doesn't make sense at that point because the used ones are going to be almost out of warranty. It's going to cost me money to maintain. Again, I wanted a manual transmission. Who knows how well that one was maintained. Maybe somebody really launched it a lot and didn't really care about the clutch life because they knew they were going to return it as a lease later on. I was concerned about that. And so I had to think, well, if I buy the used one, I've got a budget, about $5,000, $6,000 to replace the clutch. And who knows about the other components? Maybe people didn't change the oil properly. They didn't baby it in the same way that I did. And so there could be other big sort of circumstances where I might have to spend more money on maintenance that I wouldn't otherwise have to do if I bought the new one. So again, the cost of the car wasn't as low as I would have liked it to be. And so the difference between the new and used wasn't that great. The interest rates at the time when I put my deposits down weren't that big of a deal. It was around 2.6%. So that was a good rate relative to the used cars. And the maintenance costs that I would have had later on would have been great. I would have had to spend a lot more money on maintenance compared to the new car with the full warranty. And the depreciation was also a big deal. Again, Golf Rs are still somewhat of a desirable car, and they don't depreciate in the same way that my Mazda CX-9 did. And so that was an important factor. I didn't want to have to worry too much about depreciation in the same way that I did about my Mazda CX-9, because I may want to sell the car in a few years and I don't want to take a $20,000, $30,000 hit. So all of those things were important considerations. And again, I couldn't find anything else that was better or that could save me more money. And so I ended up buying the new car. But for my CX-9, for example, when I went out to buy that, the new ones were around $55,000, close to $60,000. And I bought mine 2 years old. It was a demo and I bought it for $38,000. So I saved myself a ton of money, and it still had a factory warranty, and I bought an extended warranty that saved me thousands of dollars in maintenance costs. So that made sense. And the fact that it's depreciated now, probably another $20,000, that's okay. I don't care, because I'm going to run that car to the ground. So again, there are so many things here. You got to think about the purpose. You got to think about the finances. You got to think about why you want to buy the car and the type of car that you're trying to get. And you also need to think about the emotion that goes along with it. For me, getting the brand new Golf R, I've never bought a new car in my life. And there's something really exciting about knowing that the car you get, nobody else has touched and played around with, and you can keep it as pristine and as nice as you want it to be. Unlike getting a used car, you sort of get whatever you get. And that's okay if that's what you care about. But this Golf R to me was something special, and I really cared about it. So all those different criteria, all those buckets I had to think about before I bought my Golf R. Now, I want to leave you with one last thing, just in terms of a good way to think about decisions and how you might want to go about buying or deciding about whether you buy a new or used car, or whether you buy a Honda versus a Toyota versus a Mazda or a Nissan or any other car out there. And that is, you want to think about all those things that are important to you. And they could fall across any of those buckets. It could be a financial thing. It could be a features thing. It could be a safety thing, a fuel economy thing. Doesn't matter what it is. Force rank all of the things that are most important to you in order of importance. If the total cost of ownership is the most important thing, that's going to be something that you really have to consider. And if the numbers don't make sense to you, that's going to be the be all and end all. You're not going to buy that car because the financial total cost of ownership of it is most important to you. And so you may end up getting a used vehicle as opposed to a new one because financially it makes more sense. Or you may get a new one because, again, you keep it for 10, 15 years and financially it makes more sense. So if there's something that, again, it's something that will be a deal breaker for you, put those things in order of importance, and that's going to help really shape up the type of vehicle that you get, how you buy it, if you pay for cash, finance it, lease it, if you get a new versus used, what type of vehicle you get in general. That's going to help narrow down those options. I didn't have any other options when I narrowed down all of the things that were most important to me. There was no other car on the market that did everything that I wanted it to do in the way that I wanted to do it. So I ended up with the Golf R. It was a very easy decision. And when people ask me, why am I waiting a year and a half or 2 years for the car? Well, there was no other option and I was able to wait for it. And that may be your situation too. Or you may have 2 or 3 other options that you can take a look at, and that'll be great. But instead of boiling the ocean saying, let's go find a new car and look at all the options that are available, or just ask your friend and say, well, what did you buy? I'm going to buy the same thing. Think about it very carefully, because that's going to help make sure that you make the right decision and you won't have that buyer's remorse. I made another video about making decisions. I'll put that also in the pop-ups at the end of the video. These are important things to consider. But anyways, I can go on forever about this. I hope you found this video helpful. It was fun and important for me to make. And again, I've had a lot of people ask me recently about how to make their purchasing decision. And I think it's important to think about new and used and how you're going to decide either way what's the right decision for you, not for somebody else, not for what other people tell you, but what's actually important and valuable to you. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch the video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you've taken some good nuggets out of this for buying cars or for buying other things in your life. And I can't wait to see you in the next video. Have a great rest of your week.